Today, finding a third straight way along a mini curved path.
Welcome to Coffee with Creamer, where you get to sit down with our host, Dr. Barry Creamer, for a conversation about faith, life, and culture. We'll look at old ideas through a new lens, turn those culture wars on their head, and paint a picture of the way things could be. If you like your thinking deep and your coffee hot, pull up a chair. You're in the right place.
Okay, third time I mentioned to you through the summer, we thought, these people I know, I really respect them. I've learned a lot from them, and we haven't really shared much about them with you, the vice presidents at the college where I serve as president at Criswell College. And so we're on to the third vice president to have this conversation with since then. Today is Kevin Stilley, our vice president of finance. That is the CFO for us, for those of you who use that lingo. Kevin, thanks for taking time to come on the podcast with us.
Great. It's great to be with you. Can't always say that, but it's great to be with you today.
I've known you, for people who don't know where that comes from, it's like, is that how you talk to your boss? We've known each other for a long time. I mean, since early 1990s, maybe 1990 itself probably is about when we met. Going to school here at Criswell College. Our studio is at Criswell College. And then we're in the doctoral program together over at UTA. And so, yeah, I've been a friend for a long time. I really appreciate you. One of the things that's funny here, what I want to do is just talk about stuff that's happened in your life because we find it helpful, and I think we've had people who listen who find it helpful to just see examples of how we feel like we get knocked off our path, but we still end up where God wants us to be, and we can still be obedient and find a straight path. So that's what we mean by the straight path that we're talking about. And so I want to start with the one that I think is the funniest about you. It's one of the funniest things about you, is your undergrad program. So you're already laughing because you know where this goes. You took an inordinate amount of hours. You went an unorthodox path in getting your undergrad degree. And you've been involved in higher education for most of your adult life. I mean, you got into it, obviously, in the undergrad program, but then you stayed in it. So it's not like you went through this and it was horrible and then you just left higher ed behind. You're in it. So talk about what you went through in making choices about how you were going through your undergrad program, how many hours you ended up with, and what that degree ended up like, and how did it benefit you or harm you, So what do you think?
Yeah, I think I hold some kind of world record on the number of undergraduate hours before you actually get the bachelor's degree. I had 220 hours, which is 100 more, almost double what ordinarily is required. And it wasn't because I was a bad student. I've always been a great student. It was a philosophy, and
your philosophy?
It was Mark Twain's philosophy. Okay. I had read early on in life where he had said that he never let his schooling get in the way of his education. And I adopted that as a philosophy of education. Much to my disappointment, that doesn't necessarily get you to where you want to be. It does help you in actually becoming, kind of the idea of a humanities program is that you become a complete person, as the Greeks would talk about. And so it does help you, that breadth of knowledge does help you become a complete person, but it doesn't get you to your degree program, when one semester you're taking crisis and change in Southeast Asia, and the next semester you're taking oceanography. And so...
Did you really take those two?
Yeah, those were two of the many different kinds of classes that I took. And some of that was exacerbated by the fact that I was traveling around the world in the Air Force also. But yeah, I don't know of anyone anywhere that has had that much.
Where were you getting your undergrad credits, by the way? What kind of schools were you going to?
They're spread over about 9 or 10 different colleges, universities.
Which itself doesn't help you get immediately to a degree, by the way.
Right. And so I actually eventually ended up connecting and pulling those all together, and ended up getting the degree through Liberty University.
Okay,
Which,
all right.
that was, as far as functionality, that was the most.
They were the ones
functional
who would
thing.
take the credits,
That's
apply
exactly
them, and then
right.
you get out.
That's
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, very good. So I do want to add one question to this, because you mentioned the breadth of knowledge that you get because you cover all these different disciplines that are unrelated, and sort of the humanities approach to this, which is also really a liberal arts type approach. It's just learn everything you can learn, apply all that you can apply. In the current, climate regarding higher ed, especially among evangelicals, Christians, there's a lot of focus on return on investment. So you apply yourself to higher ed so that you can get the job you want, and it almost becomes a trade school. So who needs employees? We need higher ed to provide that, and we do a good job of that. Higher ed does a really good job of that. I appreciate that, but that's not what your degree and your approach to education sort of leads to. So how do you just give me your thoughts in response to that, to the whole current climate?
There were huge benefits to the way that I approached it in terms of becoming that person with a wide breadth of knowledge. As a matter of fact, my kids, because of my educational background and because I read very broadly, my kids tend to talk about me as knowing a little bit about everything. So, which is kind of the whole idea of humanities. Less and less about more and more until eventually nothing about everything. And so that's kind of me. I know just a teeny tiny bit about everything. So that's not the advice, though, that I give my own kids, and that's not the advice that I give students whenever they come through. I suggest to them that they very intentionally pursue a focused educational program, because while college does a great job of helping you become that complete person, there's also the sense in which there's a telos to what those students are going to be. We even have kind of the idea of what our perfect student would be when they graduate. And so getting through the graduation process is very important. So I encourage a very focused program of study in terms of educational pursuits. And then in personal terms, continuing education, making sure that you intentionally broaden your horizons. There's a great little book by the name A Student's Guide to Liberal Learning by James Schall. And in it, he talks about the failures of education to provide primary source readings from people like a Plato or Aristotle or a Kierkegaard, or people who've been very influential, and instead just focusing on what gets you your credentials so that you can go get a job. And so that, like Peter Criff's book, where he talks about, you go to college so that you can get a job, so you can make enough money so that your kids can go to college so that they can get a job.
Yep.
And in the cycle, a functional cycle, and there's a role to all of that. And I do encourage my own children and those who are in my influence to focus upon the educational program intentionally and in a focused manner. But if someone is really going to be a complete person, they have to reach beyond just a narrow focus of life. Because, and at the risk of offending some of my academic peers, I mean, we all know people who are academics who know nothing about life.
Yeah.
And they are the smartest people in the world.
He's staring me down while he's saying these things.
They're the smartest people in the world. It's about such a narrow focus of the world that you would never go to them for actual advice or consultation or counseling, because they're clueless when it comes to that. And that's not being mean. It's just they've chosen to be too focused in their pursuit. So there are benefits to a very broad scope of learning, and then there are some benefits to actually being more focused in your approach.
I appreciate all of that, and a part of it is just recognizing that hopefully you could find a school. Not everybody can do this, but hopefully you could find a school, and I think Criswell does this. You were mentioning it in the graduate profile, what we try to accomplish, where the specific program is actually designed to give you a breadth of exposure. The liberal arts approach, expose you to a lot of different material. Part of the reason for that, I appreciated the way you said this about, you go to pay for your college so you can get a job, so you can pay for all of that and get your kids to go to school and get a job. It just becomes part of the process of being a producer in the world. And in Hannah Arendt's language, who I did a few episodes on this, we don't want to just be producers. We want to be producers. We want to be makers. We want to be actors. We want to be all those things, and that requires something more well-rounded. So I appreciate that very much. I like the approach. Obviously, I value the approach.
Well, that's one of the things I love about Criswell College, and is that even though we do have some very focused programs of study, politics, philosophy, economics, or biblical studies, there's a humanities element that's brought into all of those classrooms, and our professors are committed to that. Michael Polanyi talks about tacit learning and what we learn from just walking alongside someone. And, that's what our students talk about all the time, is the fact that they get to walk along these professors who, they have lunch with, they spend time with in the lounge, and these professors actually give them a kind of philosophy of life wisdom based upon their experience that's broader than just that narrow focus that we talked about.
You and I have both been in the conservative world for a long time. And conservative, by its definition, is sort of preserving the current state of things. And obviously, we have to be particular about what we do and don't conserve. You and I both agree on that. But it is just part of the nature of conservatism to do that. Heaven forbid that we should be frozen in our current state without any growth. And higher ed is one of those few areas where a student's mind can be forced to examine things that normally people just take for granted.
I think that's one of the benefits of reading Russell Kirk, very influential thinker of the 20th century. He wrote a couple of very important books, The Conservative Mind, The Roots of American Order. So one of the things that he drew upon was the idea that a good conservative is going to conserve the best traditions of the Greeks, the Romans, and the Hebrews, but at the same time he's going to critique those traditions, those ideas, the best thoughts of mankind with liberal ideas. That is, his intake is going to be very diverse, it's going to be very liberal, but it's for the purpose of critiquing those best ideas, so that constantly you're challenging your own traditions, your own thoughts, and arriving at the best way of thinking.
And I love that. I love that idea. I talk about it all the time in a slightly different way, but I think it resonates with what you're saying, because I'm always saying it this way: the things we conserve are only made valuable by the things we don't. We have to make a distinction between the two. So higher ed, again, you went through a bajillion hours, well-rounded. I love the breadth of knowledge that you have. I'm grateful for that. I mean, you have that background, and you're a CFO, so it's a varied journey that you've been on. Went and got a master's degree, worked on PhD, so you've got all that background. The other thing that was going on in your life that was formative for you was a commitment to ministry. Actual ministry, going and preaching, being a pastor, leading out in a variety of ministries. So what I want to hear about is that. Where did that originate, your commitment to ministry, and how has you've always been involved in ministry of one kind or another. Criswell College is a ministry, as an example. But you've pastored. You've been in ministry for a long time. How did you get involved in that? How did you feel, called to it, or whatever, however you describe that? But also, where did it go? Where did it take you didn't expect? And where is it now for you?
Well, we've all heard preacher kids' stories. Pastors' families tend to think if they can just keep their kids in church enough, they won't have time to sin. Instead, they learn to sin in church. And so pastors' kids tend to get neglected a bit, because pastors have a tendency to be very committed to their ministry, committed to their people. All of that is very laudable, but unless time is taken to intentionally pour into your family, you can end up neglecting them. And I think while my dad was the best man I've ever known, there was still some level of neglect there. So I grew up with a bit of a chip on my shoulder against the church, would never have ever considered church ministry unless I felt like I had a divine call. And I do have a divine call story that I won't bore you with today, but I do feel like God called me into ministry. And along the ways, he's led me down a variety of paths. I've served in extremely large mega church. I've served in a church where we were really happy if we hit 50 on a Sunday morning. But, it's interesting. Every one of those places of ministry were places that I didn't necessarily seek that particular location or that particular ministry. I either felt like I was pulled into it or I was pushed into it.
Huh.
And I think while I think that frequently God gives a desire upon someone's heart, and that's the way that they are called into ministry, for me, it seems like it was all kind of accidental and divine. And so God kind of placed me where I tended to be needed at the moment.
So if I asked for an example, and you can choose anything from the middle also, but if I asked for an example from the extremes, you mentioned a mega church that you've been in, you mentioned a 50-person church that you've been in, and you were serving as some kind of pastoral leader in each of those contexts. What if I just said, give me an example of something that you feel like you experienced that you didn't expect in that context, that when you went into it, you thought, oh, well, it's going to be this way. And when you got there, it actually was different than that, and how that influenced you or impacted you. Can you think of anything like that?
I think it's really important to understand that every place is very different. I mean, I pastored in Atlanta. I was there for 2 years. It was a very
Atlanta, Georgia.
Georgia, yeah.
Okay.
It was a very difficult environment, and yet in 2 years, I heard not one cross word, not one, between anyone. It was that kind of very sweet fellowship. The little old ladies in the church referred to me as Brother Honey. And it was a wonderful experience. And then, the next church that I went to pastor, I hadn't been there a week until I had to keep two deacons from killing each other, literally.
And
wow. So I think every place of ministry is going to be different. And so if you go into a place of service with an idea of this is the way it's going to be, then you're going to be surprised. It's perfectly fine to have plans and intentions and a way to strategically move forward, but you better be able to navigate on the ground because once the bullets start flying, whatever battle plans you have, they're going to change really fast.
I mean, this is it's interesting because I hadn't thought about the fact that sort of explains something about your personality. Maybe this was just in your personality to begin with, but I will say one of the characteristics about you that seems obvious from the outside is that you're very circumspect when you come into any setting. When you come to our meetings, when you are meeting with a new group of people, when I've seen you meet with people from outside the school who come to the school, whatever, I see you sit quietly for a good portion of those conversations before you ever say anything. I suspect, I don't, do you think that was informed by what you're describing, or have you just always been that way?
I think that's part of it. I think part of that is my personality. I never want to overstep my grounds, So, I want to make sure I don't take the high seat. It's much better to take the low seat and be moved into a high seat or to speak out of turn. I think some of that's just personality. I don't want to put myself in that position of being too forthright, too arrogant, too whatever.
Which you never are. If I know that if I had asked you at the age of 20 if you were going to go to work for Borders bookstores at some point, I would assume you would have said, "Why would I do that? That doesn't make any sense." Is that a fair statement, by the way? First,
no, that's exactly right.
Okay,
yes.
So and yet here at some point in your career, you went to work for Borders, and it was more than just pulling books off of shelves kind of work. So first, if you don't mind, just kind of describe what your career was like at Borders, but then more importantly, how you ended up there, what it meant for you, what you learned from there, what you think about that experience now, because it was a sort of it was a surprise experience, if nothing else. Well, a surprise to me anyway. So I don't know. Tell us your story about Borders.
Yeah, I went to work for Borders in the early 1990s, and it was really just intended to be a part-time job to get me through my PhD studies. Borders was rapidly expanding at that time all across the country and eventually internationally, and they put in a store here in Dallas, Texas. And so I applied for that just a part-time position. I later found out from the general manager that several times along the way, she had wanted to just forget about my application because we were having trouble connecting with one another. And she said that the reason that she continued to pursue my application was because of my signature, of all things. So you know, that's some ways that's really weird. In another way, there was something there that God used, I think, to bring me into the Borders, because that completely shaped my life in a way that I did not expect. So went to work for Borders with the intention of just being a part-time job for a short term. Ended up getting numerous promotions and eventually ended up leading the Learning Center, the Regional Learning Center in Washington.
So not everybody knows
DC.
what that means. It's actually more significant than it sounds. So what does that mean?
Yeah, Borders at the time, rather than send trainers into stores that were dysfunctional, what they did was they set up regional learning centers. There were 5 of them across the country. And the idea was you would run your store perfectly. And then they would send managers from dysfunctional stores to your store to learn how it was supposed to be. And so we did training out of those regional learning centers on helping those people be able to go back into their own stores and turn them around. And it was a very
And you were running
productive process.
one of those regional
So I
learning
did the
centers.
Mid-Atlantic Learning Center out of Washington, D.C. So we ended up covering Pennsylvania, Virginia, Washington, D.C. itself, that part of the country. And it was a great experience for me. One of the things that was really a surprise to me that I didn't expect was the breadth of learning of booksellers. Now, this isn't true of every big box retailer. Sometimes today in big box retail, they try and sell books the same way you would sell toothpaste out of a drugstore. But the history of book selling is that booksellers, they know their books. They're in the industry because they love books. And the people that I was surrounded by were people who might not have a bachelor's degree, but they were reading a book a day. They were reading, 5, 6, 7 books a week or more. And so the most intelligent, the most well-read, the most educated people that I've known in life haven't actually been in academic circles. It was working in bookstores. And so that gives me a real kind of, I think, unique perspective on the value of self-education and continuing education for the individual. So I worked for Borders for almost 10 years, right at 10 years. And then there in Washington, D.C., on the day that the terrorists flew the airplanes into the World Trade Center, and for us it was the Pentagon, we sat on top of one of the stores there right outside of Washington, D.C., and watched the smoke come up off of the Pentagon.
Wow.
And I turned in my resignation that day and said I wasn't supposed to sell books. I was supposed to be in ministry. So, well, I can't explain what the connection in my thinking was between the catastrophe and the change of life. I do know those things were very connected for me personally.
So you went back to vocational church ministry after that in some way?
I left Washington, D.C., and a couple of months later, I was at the tiny little church at the end of a dirt road in Arkansas where you could not get to the church unless that's where you were going to. It was at the, well, there was a graveyard further down the road, and sometimes people might have associated that actually with the church, but a few months later, I was back in ministry in a tiny little church in Arkansas.
Fascinating. So when you leave Borders and you go back into church vocational ministry, it's not like there are not ways to serve outside of the church, but your calling, you felt, was to go back to vocational ministry of some kind.
Yeah, that would be a fair way to explain that.
And so did your experience, because you had pastored before that, and you had been in ministry already, and then you go off to Borders. So did your way of doing ministry change? And it may not have. That's fine. I don't know for sure if anything did change. But, with all that experience at Borders, did something change in the way you actually did ministry?
Definitely. I think all of us are changing all of the time. And for me personally, when I went back into church-related ministry again, well, the best way I can describe it is this. One of the search committee members said to me, we've had great pastors, we've had great preachers, we need a manager. And so I think internally within the church, negotiating the internal elements, managerial elements within the church, I was better conditioned, I was better experienced for engaging in that process, because every dollar you spend is a vote for a particular type of ministry.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, this segues perfectly into what I wanted to talk about next, because, we've talked about your higher ed experience, the things you went through there, the bajillion hours you got in undergrad work and so on. And we've talked about your management skills that were developed at Borders and talked about ministry and all those kinds of things. But a part of the picture for you is that in all your journey, you, for instance, taught at a seminary in Fort Worth for a while and did all these other things. The Lord led you back to a place where we're doing ministry, but we're doing it as Christian higher ed at Criswell College, which I'm extremely grateful for. I mean, I'm really happy that you ended up here. But one of the things you do for us, you are our CFO, our vice president of finance. You took charge of a major project that we had as an institution, and I'm not trying to be congratulatory or something like that, or just celebrate ourselves. But you have to be proud of the fact that one of the things you accomplished for us was building a 5-story building, and not everybody does that, And I hope, it's a beautiful building. It's really amazing how God has blessed us with this thing. But it was your job to actually get that done. I remember when we were getting it started, and we came to you and said, you're going to be the project manager. You're and I mean by that, our internal project manager. You're the guy that ran it in the house. And I just said to you, we have to have a dorm. You have these parameters. Build something students can live in. That's the whole thing. So when you took that over, I'm sure you had no idea how many barriers you would run into. But they always come. And I knew there are always twists and turns in every kind of project that a person's going to face. And so I didn't try to tell you had to do it this way or that way, but I just cannot even imagine how many brick walls you ran into. And I don't mean the brick walls that we built on that building before we had those brick walls up. I cannot imagine how many times you ran into a barrier. So do you mind talking about that for a minute?
Yeah,
Just give us a perspective.
I would say in terms of application, everyone will build a 5-story dorm at some point. And it'll be a different project. Mm-hmm. But that almost everyone is responsible for some form of project management. And yet, speaking in terms of organizational behavior, most people are not trained in project management. If someone gets a business degree, that'll show up in their business communication skills, perhaps, or in other things. But even then, project management may not be a part of the curriculum, and yet everyone does project management. So whenever I came to that particular project, what I was bringing to it wasn't an education in project management, but experience of doing projects. And so I would say, speaking organizationally, probably here at the college as a part of our HR training program we're putting together, probably project management needs to be a part of that, because there are big projects, small projects. And there are lots of tools that you can use. There are timelines and task list and all of that. But the biggest issue is making sure that you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And I mean that metaphorically speaking. We have no enemies here other than Daisy Reynolds.
Kevin's been with us for a long time.
Yes,
Daisy's laughing. It's okay.
But everyone has their own idea of what that building should be, with the exception of you, who you just wanted to house students, right?
Just want students.
But everyone else has an idea of what it should be. We did probably, I would guess, 10 different kind of focus groups that involved faculty and staff, and multiple focus groups with students, etc. And yet we came to the end with, this is our project, this is the end that we're looking for, this is what we want to complete. But along the way, you have very influential people making very important decisions, people like architects and program managers and faculty and students and the facilities director. And all along the way, they could make important decisions that could vary from the initial plan unless you were staying, as the project manager, staying on top of them, their connections, their relationships. And so, as with much of life, the most important thing was staying in good communication, having the right kind of communication with all of those individual people who were doing the very best job they could do and were very talented and very skilled and very well-intentioned. But if they pursued their own unique agenda, it would end up like that car the old song was about, where the guy stole a part from the automobile manufacturing plant, constantly, and it took him 20 years to have enough for a whole car, but it was just, a car that was made up of parts from separated by 20 years of different, so it was a conglomeration. It wasn't a real car. And that's the last thing we needed from the dorm was to be a conglomeration of ideas. And so now we have the most beautiful dorm, literally most beautiful dorm of anyone anywhere. So
I appreciate your pride about it.
I have been in Ritz-Carltons that weren't as nice as our dormitory.
There you go.
And so
I'm happy with that too. And I've never thought about it before, but I don't know the song you're talking about. But as you were describing that car being put together, I was thinking of the old car maker AMC. You remember American Motor Company, which they used engines from one company and frames from another and whatever, and just put together cars. And honestly, there were some monstrosities there. So I understand. We didn't end up with an AMC dorm. I appreciate that very much. Nothing to do with AMC theaters, by the way. So that's all fine.
But just as a short summary, I'd say to everyone, get some project management training if you can, even if it's very informal, even if it's a simple podcast on project management. And then the other thing is advice I give to people in all kinds of scenarios, and that is be a good communicator and allow your people to communicate with you so that you can stay on task.
Perfect. So one of the things that should be obvious in this is you carry a lot of different responsibilities in the school. It's a lot of pressure, and there is, it's a lot of pressure to maintain all the different elements of the business side of the school, the finance and operations of a school, and there are particular complexities in this school that have, you've had to shoulder. It's just part of your responsibility. All of that said, one of your responsibilities here is over HR and over the health and professionalism of our employees and staff, faculty, administrators, everybody. And either you said this in a staff meeting recently or you sent it out in an email. I don't know where you put this out, but I remember you talking about your own work-life balance and how that had changed over the last year or two in a good way, that you felt like you'd found a better footing in that relationship. And so I just want to give you a chance to talk about that for a minute. I think it's one of the things a lot of us don't do well, if we even think about it at all. So just curious what you...
Yeah, I would say kind of the key to that for me personally was the idea of letting go. So, and I think all people who are in positions where they're strongly committed to it, desirous of serving, they may have the problem of letting go. Whenever we hire directors here at the college, getting them to be ambitious or wanting to pursue their job isn't even an issue for us. They would not come here unless they wanted to pursue it wholeheartedly. But as a result of that, they want to change everything. They want to have a voice in every department and every division. And so while all of those people, we want them contributing and we want them communicating cross-divisionally and interdivisionally, there's also the important element of being able to let go. Once you've communicated, once you've shared, once you've contributed, you've got to be able to let go of it and let the people who are ultimately responsible for that do what they need to do. And you've got to be okay with that. And I think that for young managers or new directors, sometimes it's difficult to let go of those things. So there's an organizational behavior element to it, but then there's also the kind of the personal side of it, in which, for instance, I carry my email in my pocket. You know, most of us do.
You mean your
with
phone?
Our phone, yes. And it's almost impossible to get away with it. And I remember the conversation you and I were having. It was because was commenting on the fact that used to I would go home, and every time an email came in from work, I would respond to it right then, which meant that I was working every hour of every day, because that's the way emails come in.
Which seemed fine to me. Worked out great for me.
So, but you can't work all the time. And so one of the things I did was I learned that there are certain hours or certain days that I let go of it. That email will still be there on Saturday rather than Friday or whatever. And so letting go of things so that you can focus on others is an important.
I just want to say how funny it is that in a work-life balance conversation, your relinquishment of total control was letting an email go to Saturday instead of Friday. That should tell people how the load is on you, by the way.
Well, and again, organizationally, we have to be aware of that, because I wouldn't be getting those emails on Saturday and Sunday unless it was our own people who are working on Saturday and Sunday to get the job done. And so organizationally, we have to be able to help people to let go of things. You know, one of the things I made a Facebook post upon it recently that I did 10 years ago whenever I came to work here. You know, whenever I came to work here, it was a new job, new responsibilities, and pretty hefty duties. I found I just didn't have the emotional ability to carry on with everything that I would hear as a newsaholic, everything coming in from politics, etc. I had always been one of those people. I had to watch the news
very engaged
every day. You know, it's like that breadth of knowledge thing we were talking about earlier. I wanted to be Google. I wanted to have all knowledge. And but now whenever I was a kid, that was fine, because you had 30 minutes of local news and you had 30 minutes of national news, and then you went on with your life. Now it's 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. And so whenever I came to work here, I let go of the news. I let go of politics, and that provided an emotional energy to me, a relief from a sap on emotional energy. I really should say I let go of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think finding the right things to let go of are very important for managing, your own stress levels in terms of responsibility.
Quick question I didn't give you a heads up about, but I'm curious what your thought is on it. We moved to a 4-day work week about 2 years ago or so, something like that. That's actually not precise.
4 days office hours.
4-day office hours. That's right. Because, obviously there are people with different responsibilities. They work outside of the office anyway and so on. And so we're available on Fridays for work, but whatever. So my point to you is, though, it changes, because now the Friday, you're not expected to be in the office. Our offices are not open normally.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so people are at home, and if they have work to do, they do it. But if they don't have any obligation to report to the office. So, has that in your mind increased, because a lot of people are considering that right now. Schools are starting to talk about, school districts in North Texas are starting to consider having a 4-day school week and so on. So other employers are going to start thinking about the same thing. Has that been, in your mind, a good thing, bad thing, challenging thing? Has it increased productivity, reduced productivity? I'm just asking your opinion, in your experience, about you, but also about the institution. What have you seen?
I think it would vary by industry. I had this conversation this week with one of our employees who's been working office hours 5 days a week, and I was encouraging him with some things that were taking place, to actually try and find a way to only do office hours for 4 days a week. And I was explaining to him, while I may be working as many or more hours as what I was before we made that transition, just not having to make the commute in on Fridays has completely changed my life. Now I get up and I drink a cup of coffee, and I sit in my recliner and I read a couple of chapters of a book, and then I do what needs to be done. And so yeah, I think that's a huge change for me personally, in terms of it allows me, it's almost like flex hours. It allows me to decide. And if you hire right, train well, hold people accountable, and reward excellence, you're going to have the right kind of people who will, if you give them the flexibility to pursue their job, by their own direction will do that, and they will do that well, and they may do it better if they're not constrained by having to commute and get out of their pajamas and do some other. And you'll always have some slackers too. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Universal problem. Speaking of slackers, one of the things that it's bizarre to me. It's always been the case with you. You've always been physically active, but I will look on Facebook and Kevin just ran a triathlon or did a triathlon or ran some mud run through a forest overnight in some weird setting. So you do stuff like that. And so have you maintained, just continued to do that? Have you picked it up again now? I mean, just describe for us, as you will, your involvement with all that physical kind of stuff that you do.
Well, I've recently been recovering a little bit. I injured myself during the Dinosaur Valley Endurance Run back in November.
See, the Dinosaur Valley Endurance Run. That's what I'm talking about. That's weird stuff.
But right now I've started picking up my training again. I'm thinking about the Loup-Garou race down in southern Louisiana. Loup-Garou means werewolf. It's a night race through the swamps of southern Louisiana.
No.
So I'm not sure I want to do that because I'm really concerned about the alligators.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've picked that up, and it's a big stress reliever for me. My wife and kids say that I only do it because I'd rather spend time with my dog out on the trails than with them, and they're only mostly right. But I do love my dog. She's a Finnish Lapland named Miley. She's my favorite person, and other than my wife and kids. But yeah, it's a big stress reliever for me. It provides physical activity. Physical activity is really essential, I think, especially when you get to be my age. I'm not a young whippersnapper like you, Dr. Creamer.
We're exactly the same age.
So,
we're a few months apart.
The physical activity is good for me maintaining my cognitive abilities and for maintaining my physical health. And so intellectual stimulation, physical challenges, all of those things are important for me personally. Plus, it's a huge de-stressor in life.
Yeah, and there is and I'm assuming. I mean, you have mentioned to me outside of this context, there are other people that participate that are not exactly the people that we hang around every day.
Yeah, I love the trail running community here in Dallas. It's the Dallas Dirt Runners. You move over to Fort Worth, and it's Running Familia. You go north of Dallas, and it's Team Dirt and Vert, and it's a pretty edgy group of people. But as a whole, there are some that are not quite so edgy. People like Michael Kreiner, who's pastor at First Baptist Church of Rockwall. Mm-hmm. From time to time, you'll see where he's been out running a 100-mile race on the trails. But it tends to be a group of people that they don't look like me, they don't think like me. And it's nice to be able to spend time around people who don't necessarily have the same worldview so that you can maintain your contact with the culture and be an influence within the culture.
So I would guess that never in a million years would you have, as 20-year-old Kevin, said, this is the path my life and career are going to take in serving God. I think that's a safe yes there, because you've been a lot of directions, a lot of curved parts to the path. But in terms of the straight line, I don't think you would question at all what seems obvious to me, that there has been a straight line from where you were as 20-year-old Kevin to where God wanted you to be at this point in your life. And first of all, I'm thankful for that. But I think you would affirm that. You're nodding at me, so I'm assuming.
Yeah, I would say it's in some ways it's kind of like the old book by what was the author's name? Abbott, called Flatland.
Oh, yeah.
Where, you have multi-dimensional ways of visualizing the world. And from my perspective, it's been very crooked and very, a lot of obstacles, a lot of challenges. But I would say from God's perspective, it was very straight line. He knew exactly what my path should be, and he's sovereign in all things. And so nothing that happened to me along the way ever took him by surprise. It was part of his straight line path, while for me, it might have been, yelling at the ceiling, what are you thinking to God? So, there's a movie where one of the characters in it sits down on the couch with her sister, and she's in the midst of turmoil. And that's what she says to her sister, what was he thinking about God? And I think while that might be perceived as being disrespectful by some, I don't see that as disrespectful at all, because I think everyone has asked that question. What was God thinking? Well, he knew exactly what he was thinking. And even when we don't understand it, like Job, he had no clue what was going on with all his circumstances. And there's no evidence from the scriptures he ever really knew what he went through or why he went through what he did. For God, none of it was a surprise, and God will lead us right where we need to be.
And on that, we can close. Kevin Stilley, thanks so much for being on the episode with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining us for Coffee with Creamer. Your cup of coffee may be finished, but we are not. Come back next week for a refill as we sit down to examine a new set of ideas and cultural issues. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or visit our website at barrycreamer.com. Until next time, keep your mug hot and your mind sharp.